All right, Casey, we have one more story we have to talk about today because it has been on my mind all week. And that is the story of what I would call Main Street deepfakes. Deepfakes, these AI-generated synthetic fakes, are a problem. We've known this. We've talked about it on the show before, usually in the context of kind of big national issues, elections, protests, things of that nature.
Somebody created some synthetic audio of President Biden.
Yes, exactly. So that is a problem, and I think lots of people are rightfully concerned about it, but we're also seeing a bunch of stories kind of trickle up from local media outlets about things that are happening in much smaller sort of settings where AI deepfakes are creating major problems.
Yeah, this technology is very easy to use. It is almost freely available to use on the internet, and it is finding its way into more and more hands, and this is a story about that.
So we've seen over the past few weeks and months a number of stories like this. There was a story about deepfake nude images being created by and of high school kids that are going around in high schools. There was a similar story out of Spain that caused a big outcry. And then there was the story that happened last week that my colleague Natasha Singer at the Times covered. Really wild story about something that happened at a high school in Baltimore County, Maryland.
All right, so walk us through it.
So the story takes place at a high school called Pikesville High School in Baltimore County, Maryland. And in mid-January of this year, there were some mysterious audio clips that started going around this high school. These clips are purportedly of the school's principal, Eric Eiswert, who is making a kind of bunch of inflammatory, racist and anti-Semitic comments. He talks about ungrateful black kids in the school who can't, quote, test their way out of a paper bag. At one point, the voice says that if he gets one more complaint from a Jewish person in the community, he's going to, quote, join the other side. So, like, very inflammatory statements. And the audio clips kind of sound like he was secretly recorded making these statements. And a lot of people in the community are outraged when these clips come out. They think, this stuff is real. They're sort of harassing and threatening the principal and his family. He was actually temporarily removed as the school's principal and just triggered a huge wave of backlash, as you would expect if
Absolutely.
A school principal had been caught on tape saying these kinds of offensive things. But then people start investigating. The principal says, this wasn't me. I never said these things. The police start getting involved. They send the audio recordings to a bunch of experts and got access to some emails. And they find that actually this has a much stranger origin story.
Truly.
They find that the athletic director at Pikesville High School, a man named Dazon Darian, was having a dispute with Principal Eiswert over some performance issues. The principal had opened an investigation into Darian over the alleged mishandling of school funds. Apparently, he was making improper payments to an assistant girls soccer coach who was also his roommate.
And who apparently was hired but never did the job.
Yes.
Which is a dream job.
Right. So basically, there was a conflict between the athletic director and the principal, and they conclude that the athletic director, Dazon Darian, basically made this deepfake audio recording as retaliation for an investigation.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, this feels like a real gift to the police department. They go and start snooping around, investigating. It's like, is this principal, is he having a huge dispute with anyone in the school? It's like, oh yeah, well, there's the athletic director who the principal had recently caught funneling school funds to his roommate.
Yes, so the police, after this investigation, they conclude that it was Darian who had produced this recording and sent it to two other teachers. One of those teachers then sent it to a student, and it sort of made its way around not only the school, but also local media outlets. The NAACP was also sent copies of this recording. So after investigating this whole thing, the Baltimore County Police put out a warrant for Darian's arrest. He was arrested the next day at BWI Airport after he was stopped for having a gun, and security at the airport saw that he had an open warrant. He was charged with disrupting school activities and some related charges, like stalking the principal. And the school superintendent said that officials are recommending that he be fired.
This was the crime they got him on after all. This is disrupting school activities. Like, that seems like such a small potatoes given the gravity of this. I will also say, Kevin, you left out one of my favorite details of this story, which is that once the audio started getting around, one of these teachers sent it to a student who, quote, she knew would rapidly spread the message around various social media outlets and throughout the school. So whoever this anonymous gossip was at Pikesville High School, you may have a future in journalism. Although, of course, we will want to sort of help you vet your evidence.
Right. So very serious story, very sort of disruptive use of AI deepfakes to sort of wreck the life of a principal who it appears did nothing wrong here. And I wanted to talk about this on the show today because I think we are at the precipice of a sea change in the way that AI is used in people's ordinary lives, and a sea change in how we perceive things that appear shocking or surprising, and the kind of suspicion that will now have to be attached to any kind of evidence, no matter how convincing it is.
Yeah, I think, something we've talked about before on this show is that with the synthetic media that typically gets written about, it is of these major political figures. It's Trump, it's Biden, and there's a huge journalistic infrastructure that can go in, can investigate, can say, hey, this was real, this was fake, and sort of help everyone adjust their settings in determining what is reality. That's going to be so much harder to do at the local level where journalism has been gutted. There are few sources of trusted authority in these communities who can weigh in and make these determinations. And so this Daison Darien appears to have been exploiting that and saying, I think I can get away with this because who is actually going to come in and be able to tell that the principal didn't really say this?
And we should say the recording itself is very realistic. Like, it was actually quite convincing. So I think we should just listen to it, not because I'm like excited about spreading these fake recordings around, but I just think it's like useful for people to understand and hear for themselves how good this technology has gotten.
I'm the principal here, me and only me. I seriously don't understand why I have to constantly put up with these dumbasses here every day.
Okay, so Casey, when you hear that, if you did not know anything about this story, would your suspicion be that this is fake?
No, not at all. I mean, I think, what gets me, Kevin, is that there is so much emotion in the voice that we just heard. And I think up until now, that has been the telltale sign for me is there's a certain flatness in the affect of the voice that lets me say, okay, I'm hearing a computer. That fake voice was angry, and the also the rhythm of the words was such that like he spoke faster in certain moments and slower in others in a way that also sort of mimics human speech. So for those reasons, I did think that it sounded quite realistic. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, this technology has gotten quite good quite fast. Just a couple years ago, even the best synthetic AI voice software on the market still sounded like a robot. I mean, it was flat, it was sort of affectless, it would sort of, put the emphasis on the wrong syllables of words sometimes.
I believe it's pronounced syllable.
and it was quite labor intensive to make a deepfake audio. You needed to feed it, hours of someone's voice samples in order to be able to sort of clone their voice and make it say stuff that they didn't actually say. Now, some of these technologies allow you to do realistic synthetic voice creation with as little as a minute or two of someone's actual voice being recorded. And you're right, it does insert, there are now technologies that can insert, ums and ahs and these sort of stumbles that people make as part of our natural speech cadence. And in this case, it appears that there was actually background noise that was sort of inserted into this audio file to make it sound more like something that someone had caught on a sort of hidden recorder in their pocket or something.
Yeah, there was a kind of tinniness to the audio that also made it just kind of, give you that impression of was surreptitiously recorded.
So when the investigators sent this audio to AI experts, they were able to kind of flag some things that they thought made it sound more synthetic. There were signs of sort of after the fact exact human editing. But I would say that this, for me, was a good reminder of just how convincing these fakes are and how little money and technical expertise you need to make them.
I guess it raises for me the question, Kevin, of like, as you start to hear these little controversies in your community, oh, here's this snippet of audio. What are the signs that we're looking for? How do we know when to react and when not to react?
I think this is really tricky because a few years ago, I would have told you, there are a few basic indicators that something is being AI generated, right? If the voice sounds kind of flat, if it has kind of these sort of, I don't know, computery effects on it, you might hear something and think, oh, that's not real. But I think this technology has gotten better to the point that most people who are not experts would not be able to tell the difference. So I don't know if you have tips for listeners who may be worried that something like this could happen in their own community, what would they be?
Here's the message that I would give, and this is a tip that is taken from essentially how to avoid falling for clickbait and rage bait online. I think sort of during the heyday of people sharing news on social media, a lot of times you would see something that would produce this really strong emotional reaction in you, and you'd share it maybe without even reading the article, certainly without doing any work to tell whether it was true or not. And in those cases, the advice that really worked for me was, number one, like ask yourself two questions when you see a story like this. One is this story telling me something I want to hear? Is this about something I'm inclined to believe or want to believe? If so, that's the first thing that should trigger your skepticism, right? Before you share, you want to do a little bit more digging. And then the number two thing to look for is this producing a very strong emotional reaction in me? Do I find myself really angry? Am I really upset? That should be the second sign of like, okay, maybe somebody is trying to get me to feel this way. If you can ask yourself, if you can notice those two feelings in yourself before you react to a piece of media, you're going to be in a better position to understand whether somebody might be trying to mislead you.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I also think like context is very important. If some recordings or video or audio emerge of someone in your community saying outrageous and offensive things, is this someone who has a history of saying outrageous and offensive things? Does it make sense for this person to be sort of recorded saying these things? Or is this kind of a departure from sort of how people have heard them speak publicly and privately before? But I would say looking to the actual media is sort of a sucker's game, because this technology, as we've talked about, is getting so much better and so much cheaper, so much harder to tell apart from real media. I think that ultimately we just have to kind of dial up our overall skepticism about the sort of media that we encounter on the internet or in our communities.
Which does have this really unfortunate effect, Kevin, which is that when people do say really horrible, explosive things and then want to deny them, in many cases, they are going to now get the benefit of the doubt. This is a phenomenon which has a great name, the liar's dividend, right? And the liar's dividend is now that in a world where deepfakes exist, it is easier for liars to get away with lying. So that, I think, is really unfortunate. The other thing that I'm just taking away from this is, man, do we need local journalism in this country? We need, in fact, a lot of what we know about this story came from a great nonprofit called the Baltimore Banner, which is a relatively new organization in Baltimore that's trying to pick up the banner from the Baltimore Sun, a once great newspaper that is, in some pretty rough times right now. And because the banner existed, we were able to get some good boots on the ground, people who understand this community, people who could talk to people who knew and could give us some information that we can trust. Not every city has a Baltimore Banner. And so when we think about what is the solution to this deepfakes problem, it actually is in part a how do we solve a local journalism question.
I agree with that. I also think there are some things that the tech companies could do to prevent or at least to cut back on the abuse of these tools for retaliation or retribution or revenge. Some of these platforms now require you to sort of prove that if you're trying to clone someone's voice, that you actually have that person's permission. And I can imagine a number of ways that you could attempt to do that. But I also think there are limits to that because we now also have kind of more open source voice synthesizing tools that are just not going to take those same precautions.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But I think there's even more that the tech companies could do on top of that. I think they could experiment with some of these like audio watermarks. watermarks, in the same way that we see watermarks in images? Can they put some tiny artifact inside the audio that can be revealed that it was, made by one of these synthesizers? You can also just do something on the level of content moderation. If you're one of these voice synthesizer studios and somebody types in a sort of inflammatory paragraph to make a synthetic voice say it, it's reasonable to me for the synthesizer to say, gosh, this doesn't really seem like a great use of our technology, and maybe we'll let you do it, but maybe we'll actually make you tell us the reason for why you're synthesizing this. So at least we can have some sort of file.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also think that the other area that they should be really careful about is financial scams, because this is the other big use that we are seeing already for these synthetic voice tools, is that people are using them to basically place fake ransom calls to people's friends and relatives saying, hey, I'm calling Casey's mom pretending to be Casey, and I'm saying, I've been taken hostage and I need you to wire, $100,000 worth of Bitcoin to this address. And that kind of thing is not only plausible, but we've seen demonstrated examples of that happening. And so, yeah, if you're going into 11 Labs or one of these other sort of synthetic voice tools, and you are creating synthetic voices that are saying things about money, about sending money, about needing money, I think that should immediately raise a flag in the system, and that they should probably not allow you to do that.
By the way, I did text my mom a couple months ago about this exact issue, and I said, hey, by the way, if you ever get a call and it sounds like me and I say I've been taken hostage, make sure you call me on the phone, because it's almost certainly a scam. And I was so proud of my mom. She was like, oh yeah, I already saw like a segment about this on the news. I'm way ahead of you on this. So one thing that you generally can count on parents is to be aware of scams on the internet, because they love to read about them.
You're never going to sneak one by Sally Newton.
No, you're not.
Yeah. No, I think this is a really important thing. I think people need to be having this conversation with their family members.
Yes.
Like, there needs to be a secret passphrase or some question that you can sort of agree that you're going to ask before wiring money or sending money or doing anything involving, a credit card number or a social security number. Like, you need to have a way of establishing with your loved one that it is actually you on the other end of that call. I think this is a conversation that people need to be having with their friends and family right now.
This Mother's Day, when you call mom to tell her you love her, maybe just say, hey, what's our secret passphrase we can always use so that I've not been taken hostage? And that's going to warm mom's heart.
Casey, what is our secret passphrase? If someone ever calls you about me being taken hostage, what should we do to demonstrate that it's actually the real thing?
I mean, my initial answer was we should just say sandwich time.
Sandwich time, I like it.
Only you and I know that we like to eat sandwiches after the show. Now we've given that information away, and we will have to come up with a new passphrase.
Okay, we'll come up with a new one, and we're not going to put it on the podcast.
We refuse. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.